The lake was quiet that morning, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that carried peace but also a strange weight in the air, like something was about to change. The water shimmered gold under the soft light of dawn, gentle ripples dancing around an old wooden houseboat that floated near the center. The man on the deck leaned against the railing, holding a mug of coffee, watching the sun climb above the tree line. He had spent years saving for this life, far from the noise of the city, far from deadlines and people who talked too much about nothing. Here, he could finally breathe. He had repaired that houseboat with his own hands, sanded every plank, painted every edge, and made it his little home on the water. The sound of birds echoed across the lake, mixing with the soft hum of the wind. For a moment, it was perfect, the kind of calm that made a man forget the world's chaos. But peace never lasts long where control-loving people exist. As he guided his boat slowly toward the dock, he noticed a small crowd forming on the shore. A group of people stood together near the edge of the wooden pier, all dressed neatly, arms crossed, faces stiff. At the front was a woman wearing sunglasses even though the sun had barely risen, her hair tightly curled, her lips pursed in disapproval. She looked like someone who had never smiled in years. The man slowed his boat and raised a hand in greeting, thinking they might just be curious neighbors. But the woman's voice cut through the morning air like a knife. "You can't dock that junk here. This is a private marina." The man frowned slightly, keeping his calm tone. "Private marina? I thought this was open to lake residents." The woman scoffed. "Residents? Yes. Eyesores? No. That thing you're sailing belongs in a scrapyard, not near our homes." Her words drew quiet laughter from the others behind her, a mix of arrogance and mockery. The man sighed softly, setting down his rope, and looked her straight in the eyes. "Lady, I've been on this lake longer than your HOA has existed." She rolled her eyes. "We'll see about that." Before he could respond, one of the men behind her whispered into a phone, his tone smug. The man could only guess what was coming. Within minutes, the sound of engines echoed from the far side of the lake. 2 small police boats appeared, their flashing lights bouncing off the water. The crowd on the shore started murmuring excitedly, some even filming with their phones. The woman smiled, her teeth gleaming. "Let's see how long you stay when the law gets here," she said proudly. The man stood still, hands in his pockets, no sign of fear or anger on his face. He knew how people like her worked. They used power, not reason. They loved control more than peace. As the police boats approached, one of the officers shouted through a megaphone, "Sir, you are trespassing on private property. Please dock and show identification." The man nodded slowly and guided his boat toward the pier, every eye watching him as if he were a criminal. When he stepped onto the dock, the officer approached cautiously. "We got a call saying you're illegally docked on HOA-controlled waters," the officer said. The man looked him straight in the eye, his tone calm but firm. "Officer, I've lived on this lake since before that HOA existed. This dock used to be public access. I have documents proving ownership of my mooring rights." The HOA leader laughed mockingly. "Oh please, you think we don't know the rules? This whole lake is under our management." The man raised an eyebrow. "Management doesn't mean ownership." The officer glanced between them, clearly uncomfortable. He didn't want to pick sides, but the HOA group stood behind him like a wall, whispering, filming, waiting to see the man humiliated. The man slowly reached into his cabin and pulled out a folder, the papers old but carefully kept. "Here," he said, handing them to the officer. "Property line maps, water rights, and boat registration." The officer began flipping through the papers, his expression changing as he read. The HOA leader grew impatient. "Don't waste time with his nonsense. This man's boat ruins the lake view. It violates Section 14, Article 7, visual disturbance." The crowd laughed again, clapping like children. The man stayed silent, his calm unsettling them. Finally, the officer handed back the documents. "Sir, your paperwork seems valid, but I'll have to confirm with the county." The HOA leader exploded. "No, confirm with us. We run this area." The man turned to her slowly, his eyes cold. No. You just pretend you do. The tension thickened. Even the wind seemed to stop for a second. The woman's face flushed red. If you don't leave right now, she snapped, we'll fine you for every hour that boat stays on our shore. The man stepped closer to her, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through her words. You're welcome to try, he said softly. She blinked, confused by his tone. It wasn't defiance. It was something colder. Something that made her uneasy. The officer finally spoke. Sir, for now, please move your boat until this is settled. The man stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Sure, he said, turning back toward his boat. But make sure your report says exactly who called you. The officer looked puzzled but nodded. The man started his engine and slowly pushed away from the dock, the water rippling behind him. The crowd clapped mockingly, the HOA leader waving him off like a queen dismissing a servant. But as his boat drifted away, he didn't look back. Not once. He just kept staring ahead at the wide, calm lake, his reflection trembling on the water. A faint smile touched his lips. It wasn't joy. It was something deeper. Something that came from patience mixed with power. He whispered under his breath, You sure you want to do this? His voice was low, almost carried away by the wind, but a few standing close enough heard it. They didn't understand it then, but later, those words would haunt them. The HOA members continued celebrating their small victory, taking pictures, laughing, sharing videos in their community group chat. To them, it was a perfect morning, a moment of control, a win for their pride. But the man, as he disappeared across the lake, was already planning something much bigger, something none of them could ever expect. Behind his calm eyes, quiet fire burned. He knew exactly what they didn't. That power on paper doesn't always mean power in reality. And soon, they'd find out the difference. The next morning the man sat on the deck of his houseboat, staring quietly at the water, the sunlight breaking into 1,000 tiny reflections. The air smelled of pine and engine oil, a mix he had grown to love. But his mind was far from calm. The memory of yesterday's scene replayed in his head like a film stuck on repeat. The smug faces of the HOA members, the flashing lights, the laughter when he sailed away. He wasn't angry, not the kind of anger that shouts. It was the kind that plans. The kind that waits. He knew people like them too well. They lived for control, loved seeing others bend, and believed no one could challenge them. But they didn't know him. The lake belonged to him long before their fancy rules, and soon they would understand that truth in a way they'd never forget. As he sipped his coffee, a knock echoed from his cabin door. It was a fisherman from the next dock over, an older man with weathered skin and kind eyes. Heard they called the cops on you yesterday, he said with concern. The man nodded once. They did. The fisherman frowned. That HOA's been bullying folks for years. They think they own this whole lake. But the marina used to be open access before they took over. You should check the county office. Heard the land deeds are a mess. The man smiled faintly. Thanks, I'll do that. The fisherman nodded and left, his small motorboat humming away across the water. The man looked out at the distant houses along the shore, big, bright, and built too close to the edge, like they wanted to own the view itself. Behind those walls lived people who measured worth in rules and fines. But they had just made a mistake, one that would cost them everything. A few hours later, the man steered his houseboat toward the main dock again. He wasn't looking for trouble, but he wasn't going to hide either. As he approached, he saw two familiar police boats parked at the marina, and beside them stood the same officer from yesterday. The HOA members were already gathered, arms crossed, expressions smug, as if waiting for a show. The man tied his rope slowly, calm as ever, then stepped onto the dock. The officer raised a hand. Sir, we need to talk again. There's been another complaint. The man's eyebrows lifted slightly. Another one. The HOA leader stepped forward, her voice sharp and loud. You're not allowed to dock here. We already warned you. This is HOA property, and you're breaking community code. The man looked at her, his tone still patient. I told you, I've been using this dock for years. The lake's public, and my documents prove it. She smirked. Your old papers mean nothing. We have updated community bylaws. You either leave now or face legal action. The officer sighed, clearly uncomfortable being dragged into another argument. He looked at the man apologetically. Sir, I just need to ask you to move your boat again until ownership can be verified. The crowd behind the HOA leader cheered quietly, satisfied to see the officer take their side. The man gave a small nod and stepped closer to the officer. I understand, officer. But tell me something. Did you check who actually owns the Marina company? The officer frowned. The HOA manages it, right? The man smiled faintly. They manage it. Yes. But they don't own it. You might want to confirm that before you write me up. The HOA leader laughed mockingly. Oh, please, stop pretending you know the law. You're just a squatter with a floating shack. The man's eyes darkened slightly, but his voice remained even, almost too calm. A floating shack that's more honest than your paperwork. Gasps rose from the crowd, and the woman's face turned red. You're lucky the police are here, she hissed. If they weren't, I'd have you banned permanently. The man tilted his head. You already tried that yesterday. Didn't work. The officer stepped between them, trying to defuse the situation. Let's all stay calm. Sir, please move along for now. The law will sort this out properly. The man nodded slowly, walking back toward his boat. But before stepping aboard, he turned to the HOA leader and said quietly, You think you've won something today, but you've just opened a door you can't close. She frowned, confused by his words, but before she could ask, he untied the rope and drifted away once again, his houseboat gliding silently across the lake. The officer watched him go, uneasy. Something about the man's composure bothered him. It wasn't defeat. It was confidence. Like someone who knew the ending of a story before it began. Back on the shore, the HOA group broke into chatter. Some praised their leader for protecting the community. Others laughed about getting rid of that lake squatter. But not everyone was amused. A few residents standing nearby whispered among themselves, Wasn't this lake public before? I remember fishing here as a kid without any HOA. Another said quietly, That guy didn't look like he was bluffing. Did you see his paperwork? It looked official. The leader ignored them, walking away with a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. Deep inside, though, something in her gut twisted. She had seen that man's calm face when the police arrived, how he never raised his voice, never begged, never backed down. It wasn't normal. It was unsettling. That night, as the lake grew quiet again, the man anchored his boat in the middle, away from everyone. He sat under the stars, the reflection of the moon stretching across the water like silver glass. Inside his cabin, he laid out documents, old deeds, property surveys, and business cards. One of them had the name of a man he hadn't spoken to in years, an attorney who once worked on land development around this lake. He picked up his phone and dialed slowly. The line clicked. A familiar voice answered. Haven't heard from you in a long time. What brings you back? The man smiled faintly. You still remember the old Marina contracts? A short pause. Yeah. Why? The man leaned back, eyes on the moonlit water. Because I think someone's been playing owner on land that isn't theirs. The attorney chuckled. Sounds like HOA trouble. Exactly, the man said. And I want to know who really owns the marina. The voice on the other end went serious. Give me a day. I'll dig into the old records. Appreciate it, the man said. He ended the call and stared out into the dark. Somewhere across the water, lights from the HOA homes blinked faintly like stars trying too hard to shine. He whispered quietly to himself, They think this lake belongs to them. Let's remind them who it really belongs to. A soft smile spread across his face, not of happiness, but of certainty. The kind that comes when you know the storm is about to turn. The night passed slowly on the lake, and the man barely slept, his mind circling around old memories, faded papers, and names he hadn't thought about in years. The quiet hum of the waves against his houseboat was the only sound breaking the silence, yet his thoughts were loud, heavy with questions. Who really owned the marina? When did the HOA take over? And why did they think they had the right to control a lake that was never theirs to begin with? He knew one thing for sure. The answers lay buried in old records, and he was going to find them. By early morning, he had packed a small bag, started his truck, and driven down the narrow forest road leading to the county records office. The air smelled of wet soil and pine. The road twisted around the lake, and from the window he could see the same houses standing tall and proud on the shore. The same people who looked down on anyone who didn't fit their mold. He smiled faintly, a silent promise to himself that soon those same people would be the ones looking up at him. When he reached the town hall, it was almost empty, just the sound of a humming ceiling fan and the smell of old paper filling the air. A clerk at the counter looked up as he entered. "Morning, sir. What can I help you with?" He placed an old envelope on the counter. "I'm looking for property records on Lakeside Marina and the water rights for this area. It used to be under public trust before the HOA claimed ownership." The clerk raised an eyebrow. "That's old stuff. Might take a while to find." The man smiled politely. "I've got time." The clerk disappeared into the archives, leaving the man in the quiet lobby. He glanced around at the framed photos of town founders, old maps, and a plaque showing the date the HOA was formed, just 15 years ago. He frowned. He had been living near this lake for nearly 20. How could they claim ownership of something that existed before them? After half an hour, the clerk returned with a dusty box filled with thick folders. "Here's what I found. You might want to start with this one," he said, sliding forward a file marked Lakeside Development Corporation 1999. The man opened it carefully, his fingers brushing against yellowed paper. The pages detailed the original construction of the marina, the sale of nearby lots, and a note about unclaimed maintenance rights. He leaned closer, reading every line. One section caught his eye: water access and maintenance to remain under Lakeside Development Corp. Until officially transferred by county approval. He flipped through the next few pages but found no record of a transfer. That meant the marina's ownership was never officially passed to the HOA. It was still legally in the hands of the original development company, or whatever was left of it. His heart beat faster as the pieces began to connect. The HOA had taken control through assumption, not law. They acted like owners because no one ever challenged them. Until now. He pulled out his phone and called his old friend, the attorney. "You were right," he said as soon as the line connected. "The transfer never happened. They're running everything on paper that doesn't exist." The lawyer whistled softly. "That means whoever owns the remaining rights of Lakeside Development still technically controls the marina." "You think the company still exists?" the man asked. The lawyer's voice lowered. "Maybe. Or maybe it was dissolved. But either way, if you can locate the last managing partner, you might be able to buy the rights. Legally." The man smiled, his eyes cold and sharp. "Then that's exactly what I'll do." The lawyer chuckled. "I should have known you weren't calling me for small talk." "You know me too well," the man replied. "Send me whatever you can find. I'll handle the rest." When he ended the call, the clerk looked up from behind the counter. "Find what you needed?" The man nodded slowly, closing the folder. "More than I expected." He left the office and stepped into the sunlight, his mind spinning with ideas. The plan was starting to form clearly now, not just revenge but justice, slow and calculated. Back at the lake, he sat on the deck of his boat, flipping through the documents again. Each line he read confirmed his suspicion. The HOA had been collecting fees, issuing fines, and enforcing control over property they didn't even own. They had lied to every resident, built their authority on empty claims, and bullied anyone who dared to question them. He thought about all the people they had fined for small things: the man who built a small dock, the old woman who kept flower pots near the water, the teenager who got banned from fishing near the pier. They all suffered under the same fake power. But soon, things would change. The next day, the lawyer called back. "Got something," he said. The original development company dissolved 10 years ago, but its assets were sold in parts. The marina rights went to a small investment firm in the next county, Silverline Holdings. The man repeated the name slowly. Silverline Holdings, he said, memorizing it. Still active? Barely, the lawyer replied. They've been struggling financially. Looks like they might be open to selling those rights if someone makes a good offer. The man's lips curled into a faint smirk. Perfect. Let's set up a meeting. That night, he couldn't sleep again. But this time it wasn't because of anger, it was excitement. He stood on the deck, looking toward the distant Marina lights. Somewhere across that water, the same HOA leader who called him a trespasser was probably sleeping peacefully, thinking she had won. He whispered into the night, "Sleep while you can." The wind carried his voice over the water, soft and chilling. By the next morning, he was already on the road again, heading towards Silverline Holdings. The building was small, tucked behind an old industrial park, the kind of place most people wouldn't notice. Inside, the air smelled of paper and old carpet. A middle-aged man in a loose tie greeted him. "You're here about the Marina rights?" he asked, looking tired. "Yes," the man said. "I'm interested in purchasing them. Full ownership, including water access maintenance." The man at the desk blinked in surprise. "No one's ever asked about that. It's been sitting on our books for years." The man smiled calmly. "Then I'm your first offer." The Silverline manager shrugged. "To be honest, we'd be happy to get rid of it. It's not making us any profit." "Good," the man said. "Let's make a deal." They spent hours going over old paperwork, confirming boundaries, and checking the legality of the rights. Everything lined up perfectly. The HOA had never bought the Marina, never had the authority they claimed. When the man finally left that office, he held a single folder in his hand, stamped and signed, making him the new owner of the very Marina the HOA thought belonged to them. As he drove back toward the lake, the sky turned golden again, just like the morning it all began. Only this time, he wasn't the peaceful man on the water. He was something else now, a storm disguised as calm. He looked at the distant shoreline and whispered, "Let's see how the HOA handles this surprise." The calm lake reflected the fire in his eyes, and the game had officially begun. The man drove back toward the lake with quiet satisfaction burning in his chest, his eyes fixed on the long winding road that curved around the shore like a sleeping serpent. The same road the HOA members used to reach their precious Marina, the same place where they had called the police on him just days before. But now everything had changed. The paper in his bag proved it. He had just bought what they believed was theirs. Every plank of the dock, every mooring post, every piece of shoreline connected to that Marina now legally belonged to him. And the beauty of it all was that they didn't know yet. He wanted it that way. He wanted them to feel safe, proud, untouchable, until the ground shifted beneath them. As the sun dipped low, he parked his truck by the boathouse, stepping out with a quiet grin, the lake glowing orange and red under the dying light. He looked across the calm surface, imagining their faces when they realized who the new owner was. It wouldn't just be revenge. It would be justice disguised as irony. That night he sat inside his cabin, the table covered with documents, contracts, and old maps. The lawyer joined him over a video call, papers spread across his own desk miles away. "It's all finalized," the lawyer said with a smile. "The transaction went through. You're now the official owner of Lakeside Marina and all connected water access rights. The HOA can't legally touch it." The man leaned back, the corners of his mouth lifting into a smirk. "Perfect," he said softly. "Now let's keep it quiet. I don't want them to know yet." The lawyer chuckled. "You're planning something, aren't you?" The man nodded. "Something poetic." The next morning the HOA meeting was in full swing. The same leader who had shouted at him now stood before a group of residents in the community hall, proudly announcing that the situation with the lake trespasser had been handled. "He won't be coming back," she said confidently. "The police have been notified, and if he tries again, we'll have him fined heavily. This is our lake, and we protect it." The crowd clapped, smiling proudly. They didn't know that the same man they laughed at was sitting quietly outside in his car, listening through an open window. He could hear every word and every lie. It didn't anger him. It only confirmed how blind they were to their own arrogance. After the meeting ended, he drove away, stopping by the local maintenance crew who managed the dock cleaning and boat repairs for the HOA. They knew him from before and greeted him respectfully. "Morning," one worker said. "We heard they gave you trouble again." The man smiled politely. "Nothing I can't handle. Actually, I'm here with some updates about the marina. You'll be hearing from new management soon." The worker frowned slightly. "New management?" The man simply nodded. "You'll know in a few days. Just make sure the next invoice doesn't go to the HOA office. Send it to this address." He handed them a card with his lawyer's contact printed on it. The workers exchanged confused looks but didn't ask questions. They knew better than to get involved in HOA drama. Later that evening, the man met with a local bank officer to finalize the transfer of utility accounts. Every detail had to be perfect before the big reveal. He didn't want noise or confrontation yet. He wanted silence, the kind that builds tension before the storm breaks. For the next few days, he played his part well. He stayed out of sight, moved quietly, and let the HOA live in blissful ignorance. He even watched from a distance as they threw a weekend event at the marina, complete with decorations, music, and drinks. The leader stood by the dock, boasting about how safe and organized their lake community had become. People laughed, music echoed across the water, and not a single one of them realized they were standing on his property. The irony made him chuckle under his breath. But he wasn't done yet. A few days later, the lawyer called. "Everything's officially registered. Your ownership is now visible on the county record. It's public data." The man's eyes glinted. "Good," he said. "Time for the first ripple." That afternoon, he sent a letter addressed to the HOA board. It was written simply, politely, and directly. "Dear board members, this notice is to inform you of recent property ownership changes regarding Lakeside Marina and associated water access rights. Effective immediately, all dock usage, maintenance, and regulations fall under the new management of the undersigned. Any prior HOA authority related to these areas is void. Please direct any future inquiries to my office." At the bottom of the letter, he signed his name in clean black ink. No anger, no threats, just fact. When the letter reached the HOA office the next morning, chaos followed. The leader read it 3 times, her face draining of color as she processed the words. "This can't be real," she whispered, her hands trembling. "Who does he think he is?" She grabbed her phone and called the county office, demanding verification. The clerk on the other end calmly confirmed, "Yes, the ownership was transferred last week. Lakeside Marina is now under the name you mentioned." The leader slammed the phone down, her chest tightening. "He bought it," she hissed. "That man actually bought the marina." The board members panicked. "Can he do that? Can someone just buy it like that?" "Apparently he already did," she snapped. "We need a meeting now." Meanwhile, out on the lake, the man stood on his deck, watching the sunlight dance across the waves. The wind was calm, carrying faint echoes of angry voices from the shore. He knew what they were saying, could almost hear their disbelief. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of quiet victory. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than any argument. That evening, as the sun went down, he walked along the dock, his boots echoing against the wood. The sign at the marina entrance still read HOA property, members only. He stopped beside it, pulled out a small wrench from his pocket, and unscrewed it slowly. The metal creaked, the screws loosened, and the old sign fell into his hands. He set it aside gently, then lifted a new sign he had brought with him. In bold black letters it read, "Private property, no HOA access without permission." He bolted it in place and stepped back, admiring his work. The wind picked up slightly, fluttering the edges of the sign as if approving the change. He smiled faintly, whispering to himself, "Let's see who calls the cops now." The reflection of the new sign shimmered across the lake water like a silent declaration of war. The next day would bring confrontation, anger, and shock, but tonight, it was just him, his lake, and the peace of knowing that the tables had finally turned. The next morning started with confusion spreading like fire across the lake community. The HOA group chat was flooded with angry messages, residents were panicking, and the leader's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Everyone wanted answers. The night before, someone had replaced the old HOA property sign with a new one that read private property. No HOA access without permission. Nobody knew who did it, but deep down, the leader had a sinking feeling in her chest. She knew. The man who they mocked, the one they called a trespasser, had come back. The same man she thought had no power now controlled everything. She stormed out of her house, her heels striking the pavement hard as she walked toward the marina. By the time she got there, a small crowd had already gathered. Workers stood confused, holding tools in their hands, unsure whether to continue repairs or wait for instructions. The woman shouted, "Who gave you permission to put that sign here?" One of the workers hesitated, then said softly, "We were told by new management not to touch anything without written orders." "New management?" she repeated, her voice shaking with disbelief. "Who's new management?" Then a slow, familiar sound came from across the water, the low hum of an engine cutting through the morning mist. Heads turned. The man's old houseboat appeared from behind the bend, moving steadily toward the dock, sunlight reflecting off its wooden sides. He stood at the wheel, calm as ever, sunglasses hiding the quiet fire in his eyes. The crowd went silent as his boat slid into position and stopped near the marina he now owned. He stepped onto the dock, boots thudding against the boards. Every eye followed him. He looked around, taking in the faces that once sneered at him. The HOA leader crossed her arms, trying to hide her fear behind arrogance. "You have some nerve showing up here," she said coldly. "You're trespassing again." The man smiled slightly, the kind of smile that made her uncomfortable. "No," he said calmly. "I'm home." She blinked. "What?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, handing it to the police officer who had just arrived to keep the peace. "You might want to read this, officer," he said. The officer glanced over the papers, his eyes widening as he realized what they were: ownership deeds, water rights, maintenance control contracts, all legally stamped and registered. The officer looked up, stunned. "You're the new owner of the marina." The man nodded once. "As of last week. Every dock, every gate, every boat slip here belongs to me." The HOA leader snatched the papers, scanning them quickly, her face draining of color. "This can't be real," she whispered. "You can't do this." The man stepped closer, his voice low but sharp. "You called the police on me for docking at my own lake. You lied about ownership. You insulted me in front of everyone. You made a mistake." Her voice cracked. "You tricked us." "No," he replied softly. "I just bought what was already mine." The officer turned to her. These documents are legitimate. He's within his rights to be here." The HOA members behind her began whispering nervously. "He owns the marina. What does that mean for us? Can he kick us out?" The leader spun around, shouting, "Everyone calm down. This doesn't change anything. The HOA still controls community access." The man shook his head. "Not anymore. From today, all dock access and water usage fall under my rules. If you want to use the marina, you'll need a permit from me." The crowd gasped. "You can't do that," someone shouted. "Oh, I can," the man said quietly. "That's what ownership means." The same officer who once told him to leave stepped forward, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Funny how things change," he said. "I remember asking you to move that boat." The man grinned faintly. "And now I'm the one deciding who docks here." The HOA leader's confidence cracked completely. Her hands trembled as she tried to hold her composure. "This isn't over," she said bitterly. "You'll regret this." The man's eyes hardened. "No, you'll regret underestimating me." He turned to the workers standing nearby. "From today, you all work directly under me. Continue the maintenance, fix the docks, and send the bills to my office. Anyone giving you trouble, Send them to me. The workers nodded eagerly. They had never liked the HOA anyway. The leader shouted again, "You can't just take control like this." He turned to her slowly, his voice calm but final. "You called the police on me for using my own lake. Now, every time you walk here, you'll see my name on those docks. You don't have control anymore. I do." The officer turned to her. "He's right. The law's clear. You can't interfere with private property." The woman's face twisted with rage. "This isn't the end," she hissed, storming off the dock. The crowd parted as she passed, whispering behind her back. The man watched her go, his expression unreadable. Then he turned toward the lake, the wind blowing gently through his hair. "Peace looks better when it's earned," he murmured. The officer chuckled. "You really turned the tables." "No," the man replied quietly, watching the ripples spread across the water. "I just reminded them who owns the water." The story of what happened spread across the town within hours. Social media posts popped up everywhere. Pictures of the new sign, videos of the confrontation, clips of the HOA leader shouting while the man stood calm and collected. The comments poured in. People cheered for him. Finally someone stood up to an HOA bully. "This guy's a legend. Imagine calling the cops on your new landlord." The HOA leader hid in her house for the rest of the day, ignoring every call, avoiding every message. Meanwhile, the man sat on his deck that evening, the same spot where it all began. The lake was calm again, glowing orange under the sunset. The same birds flew low across the water, and for the first time in a long while, the air felt peaceful. But this peace wasn't fragile anymore. It was solid, built on truth and power. He leaned back in his chair, listening to the quiet sound of water lapping against the wood, and whispered to himself, "They thought they owned the lake. Now they pay rent for my view." The wind carried his words away across the lake, just like before, but this time, they carried victory. The days that followed were nothing short of chaos for the HOA. The news of the man buying the marina spread faster than wildfire through every house around the lake. People whispered about it at grocery stores, at gas stations, even at the little lakeside cafe where the HOA members often met. Some laughed, some were shocked, and many felt secretly relieved. For years, the HOA had ruled with arrogance, fining people for paint colors, garden lights, even mailbox designs. But now, the man they mocked had turned everything upside down. The HOA leader sat in her office, papers scattered everywhere, her face pale from sleepless nights. She kept reading the same letter from the lawyer, confirming the legal ownership transfer. Every time she looked at the man's name printed under owner of Lakeside Marina, her stomach twisted tighter. "How did he do this?" she muttered angrily. Her phone buzzed again, another resident demanding answers. "Are we losing access to the docks? Do we still pay HOA fees for the lake? What's happening?" She wanted to scream at all of them, but she couldn't show weakness. "Everything is fine," she lied, again and again. But deep down she knew nothing was fine. Meanwhile, the man didn't bother replying to any of the HOA's emails or letters. He didn't need to. The law spoke for him. Instead, he focused on his next step, turning the marina into something better than it ever was. He hired local workers, paid them fair wages, and started repairing old docks, repainting fences, and installing new solar lights. The lake that once looked neglected now began to shine under his management. Residents noticed the changes immediately. Families who had stopped visiting the marina because of the HOA's strict rules now returned, smiling and laughing, their kids playing near the water again. For the first time in years, the lake felt alive. One afternoon, as the man supervised a team fixing the pier, an old couple approached him. "Thank you," the woman said softly. "The HOA made this place miserable for everyone. We thought it would never change." The man smiled kindly. "Everyone deserves peace by the water," he said. "Not paperwork." They laughed, and he went back to work, pretending everything was normal, even though he knew the HOA's silence was temporary. They wouldn't give up without a fight. And he was right. That evening, the HOA leader called for an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. The board members sat around the long table, faces tense. She slammed her hand on the desk. "We need to sue him," she snapped. "He tricked us and stole our property." One board member hesitated. "But the documents are legal. The county confirmed everything." She glared at him. "Then we'll find something. A loophole, a missing signature, anything." Another member sighed. "We can't afford a lawsuit. Our funds are low after all the maintenance bills." The leader froze. "What do you mean low?" "We're almost broke," he admitted. "Too many people stopped paying HOA fees. They're angry about the fines and the new lake rules. Some even said they won't pay until we fix this mess." Her chest tightened. She looked around the room at the nervous faces of people who once admired her authority. Now they looked scared, uncertain. She felt the walls closing in. "He's destroying everything we built," she whispered. But in truth, it wasn't him. It was her pride. The next morning, she drove to the marina in a rage. She stormed onto the dock, shouting, "You think you can just take over my community? You'll regret this." The man was standing near the water, helping a worker install a new bench. He turned slowly, his calm eyes meeting hers. "Your community," he said quietly. "You mean the one you made miserable?" She pointed at him furiously. "You don't belong here. You're a troublemaker." He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "You called the police on me for docking on my own lake. You humiliated me in front of everyone. But I didn't fight back. I waited. And now, the lake doesn't belong to you anymore." Her face turned red with anger. "You'll never win. I'll make sure of it." He tilted his head slightly, almost amused. "I already did." She screamed in frustration, turning to leave, but then stopped when she saw something that made her heart sink. Several residents standing nearby, watching. They weren't cheering for her. They were watching him with respect. One man clapped quietly, then another, and soon the sound grew louder. Finally someone stood up to her. A voice shouted. About time she got put in her place. The HOA leader froze. For years these people had followed her every rule. Now, in 1 week, she had lost all of them. The man said nothing more. He simply turned back to his work, letting their voices speak for him. That night, the HOA meeting hall was almost empty. Only a few members showed up, and most of them sat in silence. The leader tried to speak, but every word felt hollow. She realized her power was gone. Without the marina, without the residents' trust, the HOA was crumbling from the inside. Meanwhile, the man's phone buzzed with messages of thanks and requests from nearby lake communities asking for his advice on managing their docks without HOAs. He chuckled softly, amazed at how quickly the story spread. He hadn't planned to become a symbol of freedom from HOA control, but that's what was happening. A week later, a local news crew arrived at the marina to interview him. The reporter asked, "How does it feel to take back control from the HOA?" The man smiled. "I didn't take anything. I just reminded people that ownership isn't about titles or meetings. It's about respect for the land and for each other." The video went viral online, gathering millions of views. Comments flooded in from people across the country. "This guy is a hero. Finally someone beat the HOA at their own game." Justice served on the lake. The HOA leader watched the video from her living room, her hands shaking with fury. Every word he said felt like a knife. Her empire of control had collapsed because of one man who refused to bow down. She whispered to herself, "He'll regret this one day." But deep down, even she didn't believe it. The next morning, as the man stood by the water watching the sunrise, the officer who once warned him about trespassing walked up beside him. "Heard the HOAs breaking apart," the officer said with a grin. The man nodded. "They built their power on fear. Once people stop fearing, it all falls apart." The officer laughed softly. "You taught them a lesson they'll never forget." The man smiled faintly, eyes still on the horizon. Sometimes the best lessons come with silence. The lake glimmered in the morning light, calm and proud. The HOA had tried to control it, tried to control him. But now, everything had turned. The tide had shifted, and this time, it wasn't going back. Weeks passed and the lake changed completely. The air that once carried tension and gossip now carried laughter, children's voices, and the peaceful rhythm of nature reclaiming what was once stolen by pride and greed. The water glimmered under the morning light, smooth as glass, reflecting not only the sky above but also the calm victory of the man who had finally restored peace to his home. Every morning he walked the docks, greeting the fishermen, chatting with families, and making sure everything stayed perfect. He had rebuilt the marina with his own money, not to show off but to prove that control didn't need cruelty. The docks were clean, boats neatly tied, and the community that once lived in fear of HOA fines now enjoyed freedom again. People respected him, not because of power, but because he never asked for it, he earned it. On the other side of the lake, the old HOA building stood half empty, its glass doors covered in dust. Its meeting hall silent. The leader who once ruled it sat in her office, staring at the faded community charter on the wall. Her phone hadn't rung in days. The board had resigned one by one. No one showed up to meetings anymore. Her so-called power had evaporated. The funds were gone, the residents no longer paid dues, and even the city had stopped taking her seriously. She tried one last time to file a complaint against the man, but the county office sent back a simple response: property ownership confirmed. HOA authority nullified. That sentence broke her. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling, whispering to herself, how did it all end like this? But she already knew the answer. It ended the day she chose pride over peace. That afternoon she decided to leave. She packed her car with the last of her things, boxes filled with old rulebooks, papers, and fines that no one cared about anymore. As she drove past the marina one last time, she saw families laughing, music playing, and the man standing near the docks talking with the officer. She slowed down, her eyes full of bitterness. For a moment their eyes met. He didn't smile, he didn't gloat. He just looked at her calmly, as if to say, it didn't have to be this way. That look hurt more than any words could. She pressed the gas and drove off, disappearing down the road that curved away from the lake forever. The officer turned to him and said, looks like that's the last of her. The man nodded slowly. She built a wall of rules so high she couldn't see what was on the other side. And you? The officer asked with a grin. What'll you do now? The man looked out over the water, his reflection shimmering beneath him. I'll do what I came here for in the first place, live in peace. The officer smiled. You've earned it. They shook hands, and the officer walked away, leaving him standing alone at the edge of the dock. The sun dipped low behind the trees, painting the sky with gold and orange. The water rippled gently, the same sound that had always calmed him. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool breeze brush against his face. This lake had seen everything: his humiliation, his patience, his rise. It was more than water now. It was a witness to justice. He stepped onto his boat, sitting quietly as the engine hummed softly. Across the water, lights flickered from small cabins, laughter echoed faintly, and the smell of barbecue drifted through the evening air. It wasn't just victory he felt. It was balance. The kind that comes when things fall exactly where they belong. He thought back to that first morning when the HOA stood on the shore yelling at him, the sound of their laughter echoing in his ears. Now the same place stood silent, owned and protected by the man they once mocked. He whispered under his breath, "You called the cops on me for docking on my lake. Now every dock here has my name on it." The stars began to appear above, one by one, their reflection twinkling across the calm surface. The world around him was finally quiet, not because others were silenced, but because peace had finally won. A young boy fishing nearby waved and shouted, "Hey mister, thanks for fixing the docks." The man waved back with a gentle smile. "Take care of the lake," he said softly. "It belongs to all of us now." The boy grinned, not fully understanding the meaning, but the man did. It wasn't about ownership anymore, it was about respect, something the HOA never understood. As the night deepened, he leaned back against the railing, watching the moon rise over the hills, its light spreading like silver across the water. He closed his eyes, letting the sound of the lake fill his mind. The same sound that once carried his anger now carrying peace. Somewhere far away, the woman who once tried to control it all drove into the city lights, fading into nothing. The lake remained, unchanged yet reborn, and the man who loved it finally had what he wanted from the start. Not victory, not revenge, just quiet, lasting peace. He whispered into the night, his voice low and calm. The lake doesn't belong to those who shout the loudest. It belongs to those who listen. And as the wind moved gently through the trees, the houseboat rocked softly under the stars, carrying the man who had turned humiliation into triumph, and turned silence into the loudest kind of victory.